Hello, today I have a video comparing an old and a new mountain bike. These are two bikes that I own, and they kind of span the extremes of the bikes that I have in my fleet as far as all-terrain bikes. First bike is a Peugeot City Express, which I picked up last year. The best I can tell, it was made in either 1983 or 1984, which really makes it one of the earliest mass production mountain bikes. Mass production meaning like made in large numbers for the general population versus more custom type builds. This bike is pretty much stock. I made a couple changes to it, like the seat obviously has been changed. The pedals have been changed, but other than that, even the grips are the original grips. It's in pretty good shape. There's some scrapes here and there, but overall I don't think the bike was really ridden much, and most of the damage was just from storage, as you find in a lot of older bikes. So one of the features that really drew me to this bike are the handlebars. These are the Nitto bull moose bars. I guess one of the original ones that came stock on this bike. For the rest of this video, I'm going to kind of go back and forth between this bike and the new mountain bike and kind of describe some of the features and how they're different. This is the Univega Rover RM 29. It's a bike that is assembled in the United States, but is obviously made from parts from overseas, as almost all bikes these days are. But in particular, this was a very inexpensive bike to purchase. It was kind of a closeout, and I thought, wow, a lot of people seem to like this bike, so I thought I'd give it a shot. I really can't say too much about the geometry of this bike, or really the other bike. I'm not really an expert in geometry, but they obviously are very different feeling bikes. I'll describe a little bit more about that later in the ride. This bike is mostly stock, and I'll describe some of the modifications that I did make to it as I go on in the video. So this first ride, I was heading over towards the conservation areas that are adjacent to Otis Air Force Base in Cape Cod and Mashpee. This is an area that is either woodlands or former cranberry bog areas that are kind of going back to nature. And so they end up being kind of more like swamp and wetland areas in between forests, and so a lot of roads and a lot of sand. So the Peugeot features an old Sun Tour shifting setup. The front derailleurs are the AG or Alpine Gears model. It has thumb shifters, which these are the power ratchet type shifters. At least they're based on those. I think originally were bar end shifters, and they shift very nice. They are friction shifts. It has a 14 to 30 tooth rear freewheel, 6-speed. The front chain ring is a triple chain ring, 46, 40, 32. A little bit strange, the two large gears are pretty close together. With those ratios, this is a bike you certainly have to muscle at pedals at times. When I purchased the bike, it did have the original SR pedals, which are pretty cool looking, but they have a fairly small surface area for contact with your feet, and so I didn't really stick with them as a viable option for riding. I'm just running some generic mountain bike pedals I got off Amazon. For the second ride, it's a fairly small loop that's close to Katuitt. I go north into the area just in the Marston's Mills general area. And then I kind of head over towards Santua Pond and through Santua Pond, and then come back through, in Mashpee through the Noisy Hole area.
It's not like to stay up in that high
across
gear.
28 and then back into Katua. So the Univega originally came with a 1x9 setup and with a 32 tooth in the front and I believe an 11-34 in the back. So that really is just barely over a 1-to-1 ratio. So it wasn't a really particularly good climbing bike out of the box. So the modification I did to the bike was to go to a 1x11 setup, Deore 5100, and so that is a 1151 cassette in the back. This certainly gives a pretty good climbing gear for whenever it gets really steep. I installed some Crank Brothers Stamp 1 pedals, which I really like. They just have a good grip to them. So getting back to the Peugeot, I'm doing a ride in the Quashnet bog area, and the trail is kind of sparse in this area I'm in now, but then I get into some areas that are really, really sandy and pretty challenging actually with the 2-inch tires to get through it, as you'll see here.
Jesus Christ.
While there were some pretty challenging areas on this ride, particularly in the sand, did a lot better than a previous ride where I was riding a vintage gravel bike build that I did that had 40mm tires. So all in all, I think it did pretty good on this ride, and I'd be happy. I was very happy on the ride with this bike. Now back to the Univega. I'm in the area around Santua Pond Preserve, and not quite as deep a sand as what we saw in Mashpee in the previous clip. So this is probably one of the more challenging sections for either bike, actually, that I was on right there along that path. There's a little bit of exposure going into the lake, so I was being pretty cautious as far as speed was concerned. And you can see that on some of those hills, I was really struggling with the gearing. And I guess one of those things where you put a bike away for the winter and you bring it out in the spring and you go out and ride it, and it's not quite tuned up quite right. So when I put the Deore 1x11 setup together, I had to do a lot of finagling with the bottom bracket. I can't remember the details exactly, but I tried several bottom brackets to try to get the chain line correct. It likes to drop down a gear and underload, and so it's kind of hard to tune it on the stand. It doesn't hold up whenever you take it out and go up a steep hill. Back to the Peugeot, I think one thing that really stands out about the Peugeot is that, without getting into the details of the geometric numbers, it just looks like a road bike that's been modified such that you can put bigger tires on it, put cantilever brakes, and but for the most part, it kind of looks like a road bike. Or specifically a vintage road bike, I should say. I can only guess, but I assume that they chose this type of geometry simply for the fact that it seemed to work for road bikes, and that they just modified existing designs to start with. Both of these bikes look pretty large. I mean, they're extra large sizes for both frames, but in particular, the Univega is just a massive bike compared to the Peugeot. Just very striking. I've ridden road bikes more than I have mountain bikes, to be honest, and the Peugeot to me kind of has that feeling of riding on top of the bike that you get with a road bike, and whereas on the Univega, it feels like you're riding in the bike a little bit more, and it's an even more upright seating geometry on the Univega than it is on the Peugeot. I honestly feel like I'm faster on the Peugeot, but when I looked at the numbers for these two rides, which they're different rides, but in a lot of ways they had similar amounts of pavement and similar amounts of dirt. Maybe there's a little bit more sand on the Peugeot ride. The Univega was just slightly faster average moving speed, so I don't think they're really terribly different. Again, that's not really a scientific observation. It's more of just an observation that I had, and haven't done any testing, obviously. On this particular ride, I didn't really feel like I lacked having a suspension component. While there are some rough spots here and there, it's not a continuous thing, and for the most part these roads are decently smooth with sand, but nothing that's really jarring the bike too much, setting it out of balance, and you're not really getting a lot of shock into your hands and so forth. When it comes to hand position, I do prefer the hood's position on a bike, and so having the wrist out like that does tend to give me a little bit of trouble. As I mentioned earlier, the Univega is just a very large bike. I was actually pretty surprised when I first rode it, just how stretched out it is. It's still comfortable for me, but I'm considering putting a shorter stem. And I'm 6'2" and have long legs, so I was really surprised. I guess maybe for my torso size, maybe even a large would have been a better choice. It's still not an uncomfortable bike by any stretch for me, but just mentioning that it is quite a large bike. Having a front shock is obviously quite a difference between the two bikes, and it's nice to have the shock over really rough terrain, particularly rooty and rocky terrain, which I really didn't encounter much in either one of these rides. to be honest. There was some questions about this being actually a boost shock, and I honestly don't know exactly what that means. It does have a front through axle, and I think that's okay, but I would have been happy with a quick release for my use. The front fork does have a lockout, so you don't get that bobby feeling whenever you're going on flat pavement. Another big difference are the handlebars. These are 740 millimeter wide flat bars. They sweep back just a little bit, but they're obviously quite different than the bull moose bars, which are quite a bit less wide, and they do sweep back just a little bit more. So on this ride, I've been kind of working my way down the east side of Santuit Pond, down to the very south end of it, and this takes me to the herring run, or the herring ladders, on the south end of Santuit Pond. That's where the exit flow of the pond is, and you can see that whenever I stopped here, there was quite a herring run going on. It's quite striking to see so many fish in one small area like this in such a small stream. I mean, this is really a creek when it comes down to it. It's a Santuit River, but it's not really a river. But just how many fish are in there is amazing. Of course, the pond above it here is quite large, and you can see the little fellows that it seem like there's almost as many that are going back downstream and going up. So it's quite a iterative process for them to actually get to the pond, which is, I think, their final destination. So finally, when comparing the bikes, I think the obvious difference is the size of the wheels and the tires. The Peugeot comes with 26-inch wheels, which were standard on mountain bikes for a very long time. Fortunately, the tire selections aren't quite as good as they used to be, but I'm running some Pan-Eraser Comet hardpack tires. They're fairly smooth. They have some knobbies on them, but they're fairly small knobbies. They're not gravel tires or advertised as gravel tires, but they kind of, to me, of the 26-inch, relatively inexpensive, tires, they seem to be the ones that kind of look the best. And I have pretty good luck with them. I don't really go too nuts over like special tires or anything like that. Or at least I don't know enough to really know what the very expensive tires would actually get me. It has ancient technology as far as the brakes go. It has these big chunky brake handles, which I actually really like, and then it has old Dicomp cantilever brakes, which work fine, but certainly don't have the stopping power of the Univega hydraulic brakes. The bike still has the original hand grips, which are these kind of moto-inspired grips that were really popular at that time. So the Univega is a 29er, and so it's got larger wheels on it, and the tires themselves are 2.3-inch Kenda, generic Kenda, and they not large knobbies either, but a little more substantial than the Comet hard packs. And with that combination, you really feel like you can roll over things a little bit smoother than you can with the 26-inch bike. And there are times when you kind of feel like you have this extra momentum that maybe you don't get with a 26-inch. But again, these kind of things, sometimes you can kind of fool yourself kind of with how things feel and not necessarily reality. So it'd be interesting to take these bikes out and really compare the same climb, challenging climbs, and just see how well you can do on each one of those on the same exact climb, same day, same rider. But it's a little bit tricky to do that. But yeah, maybe I'll try to do it closer to home. So the hydraulic disc brake setup on the Univega was one of the reasons I chose getting this bike over some of the other budget options that had mechanical disc brakes. I just wanted to try the hydraulic brakes, and I have to say that they work pretty well, except for during this ride, the rear brake started kind of giving out a little bit, and I really wasn't getting much stopping power at all with it by the end of the ride. And I tried bleeding that over and over and over again. I think there was a leak. I have since installed a set of used Shimano hydraulic brakes and handles, and they seem to be working, but I haven't been on a full ride yet. The hydraulic brakes that were on this bike are branded Nut, N-U-T-T, and I've read a few other places that they've had problems with bleeding them, and they're used a lot on e-bikes. So maybe some people have luck with them, but I didn't have very much luck, so I swapped them out. I would say for this particular ride, I was probably slightly overbiked. Certainly it was a nice ride, but probably a little bit too capable. And I think overall that's something to consider whenever you're buying a bike, is like how much capability do you really need for whatever trails you're riding, and are you going to have more fun on a bike that maybe is less capable? The classic underbike situation, which I think people are kind of coming back to, knowing that it's sometimes more challenging to avoid the obstacle than it is just to roll over it. And the trend today with mountain bikes, trails being modified so that they're more challenging for the bikes is kind of an interesting thing. It's kind of parallel to like golf technology and having to make the golf courses longer. So that brings us to the end of the video. I had a fun time doing this comparison of these two old bikes. And so if you enjoyed the video, please like it and subscribe. Thank you. See you next time.